when 26-year-old David Sterling rode out into the worst blizzard Colorado had seen in decades. His father's servants thought he'd lost his mind. The heir to a railroad fortune, worth more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes, choosing to venture into a storm that had already claimed 3 lives in Pine Ridge Valley. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What they didn't know was that David Sterling was about to discover something in those frozen mountains that would change not just his life, but the lives of 7 souls who had given up all hope of seeing another sunrise. This is a story that the people of Millfield Township still whisper about more than a century later. A story they call divine intervention. But I'll let you decide what really happened that February night in 1892. The wind screamed across Pine Ridge Valley with the fury of something alive and angry, carrying with it snow so thick it turned the world into a wall of white nothing. Anna Hartwell pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around baby Jack, feeling his tiny body shivering against her chest despite the layers of cloth she'd wrapped him in. The infant hadn't cried in hours, and that terrified her more than the storm raging outside their makeshift shelter. 8 months old, Jack should have been babbling, reaching for things, full of the curiosity that babies have about the world around them. Instead, he lay still and quiet, his breathing shallow, his little lips tinged with a blue that had nothing to do with the cold and everything to do with hunger. Anna pressed her face against his forehead, whispering prayers she wasn't sure anyone was listening to anymore. The abandoned mining cabin they'd found 3 days ago was falling apart, gaps in the wooden walls letting in fingers of wind that cut through their clothes like knives. The roof leaked in 2 places, creating small pools of ice on the dirt floor. There was no fireplace, no stove, nothing but 4 walls and a roof that barely held together. But it was shelter, and after walking for 2 weeks through mountain passes with 7 children, Anna had learned not to be particular about such things. Tommy, her 14-year-old, sat in the corner trying to keep the younger ones calm. At 14, he was trying to be the man of the family, but Anna could see the fear in his eyes when he looked at baby Jack. Tommy understood what the others were too young to grasp. They were dying, slowly, quietly, but dying all the same. Lucy, 12 years old with her father's stubborn chin, had stopped asking when they were going to eat. 2 days ago, she'd given her portion of their last piece of bread to little Rose without being asked. Anna had pretended not to notice, but her heart had broken a little more watching her daughter sacrifice what might have been her only meal. That day, Ben and Grace, 10 and 8, huddled together under a thin blanket that had more holes than fabric. They'd been playing a game earlier, trying to count snowflakes through the gaps in the wall, but now they just stared at nothing, their young minds trying to process a hunger that had moved beyond discomfort into something deeper and more frightening. 6-year-old Sam had been asking for his papa for days, not understanding why Anna's face crumpled every time he did. Rose, only 4, had curled up against Anna's side and hadn't moved in hours. Anna kept checking to make sure she was still breathing. The storm had been raging for 3 days, and with each passing hour, Anna felt their chances slipping away like snow through her fingers. She'd tried to venture out that morning, thinking she might find something, anything that could help them, but she'd barely made it 10 feet from the cabin before the wind knocked her down and the cold bit through her clothes so fiercely she'd stumbled back inside, gasping and shaking. They'd been walking for 2 weeks before finding this place, ever since the fire took their homestead and everything they owned. Anna's husband had died the previous spring, a mining accident that left her with 7 children and a debt to the company store that swallowed what little savings they'd managed to scrape together. She'd tried to make it work, tried to keep the farm running, but without Robert's income from the mines, the bills had piled up faster than snow in a Colorado winter. The bank had been patient at first. Mr. Jameson had known Robert, had respected him as a hard worker and an honest man. But patience has limits, and when Anna couldn't make the payments for 3 months running, sympathy turned to business. They'd given her 2 weeks to settle the debt or lose the property. Anna had sold everything she could think of. Robert's tools, her grandmother's china, even her wedding ring. It wasn't enough, not even close. The night before the bank was supposed to take the house, she'd made a decision that still haunted her. She'd packed what little they could carry, gathered her 7 children, and left in the middle of the night. Where could a woman with 7 children go when the world had no place for them? Anna had a sister in Denver, married to a shopkeeper who'd made it clear years ago that Robert's growing family wasn't welcome in his home. Still, it was the only option she could think of. Denver was 100 miles through mountain passes that were treacherous even in good weather, but what choice did she have? They'd made it 50 miles before the early blizzard hit. February storms in Colorado were notorious for coming out of nowhere and lasting for days, and this one was worse than most. They'd taken shelter where they could find it, sharing what little food Anna had been able to pack, rationing it carefully, making it stretch as far as possible. But you can only stretch nothing so far. Anna looked around the cabin at her children, these 7 souls who depended on her for everything, and felt the weight of her failures pressing down on her chest like a stone. Tommy was trying to comfort Grace, who was crying quietly about being hungry. Lucy was singing softly to Sam, a lullaby their father used to sing to them. Ben was just staring at the wall, his young mind probably trying to understand why the world had become so hard and cold. She'd failed them. The thought came to her with brutal clarity. She'd failed as a mother, as a provider, as the one person in the world whose job it was to keep them safe and fed and warm. Robert would have known what to do. Robert would have found a way. But Robert was gone, buried in the little cemetery outside Millfield Township, and Anna was here in a falling-down cabin with 7 hungry children and no idea how to save them. The wind picked up again, rattling the loose boards of the cabin walls and sending another stream of snow through the gaps. Baby Jack stirred slightly in her arms, making a small sound that might have been hunger or just the effort of breathing. Anna adjusted his blankets, but there wasn't much warmth to be found in the thin cloth. She'd been rationing their water, melting snow in a cracked pot she'd found in the cabin, but even that was running low. The children needed more than she could give them. They needed food, real food, and warmth, and medicine for baby Jack, whose breathing had been getting worse each day. Anna closed her eyes and tried to remember what hope felt like. It seemed like a lifetime ago that she'd believed things would work out, that somehow she'd find a way to take care of her family. Now sitting in this freezing cabin with the storm howling outside and her children growing weaker by the hour, hope felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. Tommy looked up at her from across the cabin, and she saw her own fear reflected in his young eyes. At 14, he was old enough to understand their situation, old enough to know that their chances were getting smaller with each passing hour. He'd been trying to be strong for the younger ones, but Anna could see the cracks in his brave facade. Lucy started to hum another song, something their grandmother used to sing, and gradually the other children joined in. Their voices were weak, thin from hunger and cold, but they sang together anyway. Anna felt tears freezing on her cheeks as she listened to them. Even now, even in this terrible place with death creeping closer, they were still trying to comfort each other. She thought about the life she'd dreamed of giving them when they were born. A warm house, plenty of food, good clothes, maybe even schooling beyond what the little one-room schoolhouse in Millfield could provide. She'd wanted them to have choices, opportunities, the chance to become something more than what she and Robert had managed to be. Instead, she'd led them into this wilderness where they were going to die forgotten, 7 small graves that no one would ever find or mark or remember. The storm seemed to be getting worse, if that was possible. The cabin shook with each gust of wind, and Anna found herself wondering if the roof would hold through the night. She tried to calculate how long they could last. They'd had no real food for 2 days, just melted snow and the last few crumbs from their dwindling supplies. The children were weak, getting weaker, and baby Jack. Anna looked down at her youngest child, at his pale face and the way his tiny chest rose and fell with obvious effort. He needed a doctor, needed warmth and food and medicine that she couldn't provide. All her other children were hungry and cold, but Jack was truly sick, and she knew with a mother's instinct that he didn't have much time left. She'd been preparing herself for the possibility that they might not all make it through this. The thought was like a knife in her chest, but she'd forced herself to face it. If the worst happened, if they didn't survive this storm, at least they'd be together. At least they wouldn't die alone. But sitting there in the dark cabin, listening to her children's weak voices singing together, Anna realized she wasn't ready to give up, not yet. Not while there was still breath in her body and strength in her limbs. Tomorrow, when the storm calmed even a little, she would try again. She would venture out and find something, anything that might help them. She had to, because the alternative was unthinkable. Outside, the wind howled like something wild and desperate, and Anna Hartwell held her dying baby closer and refused to let despair win. Not tonight. Tonight, she would keep her children warm with songs and stories and the fierce love of a mother who would fight the mountain itself if it meant saving her family. The storm raged on, indifferent to the human drama playing out in the small cabin. But inside those broken walls, a mother's determination burned brighter than any fire, and 7 children drew strength from her refusal to surrender to the darkness. Closing in around them, David Sterling had always been restless, but tonight the feeling gnawed at him with unusual intensity. He stood at the tall windows of his father's study, watching the blizzard tear across the valley below their mansion, with a violence that seemed almost personal. The heavy curtains framed a world gone white and wild, and something about the storm called to him in a way he couldn't explain. Henry Sterling sat behind his massive oak desk, reviewing ledgers with the methodical precision that had built their railroad empire. The fireplace crackled with warmth, casting dancing shadows across shelves lined with leather-bound books that cost more than most families earned in a year. Everything in the room spoke of wealth, comfort, security. Everything David had grown tired of. At 26, David had spent his entire life surrounded by luxury that felt increasingly hollow. Private tutors, European tours, business meetings, where grown men deferred to his opinions simply because of the name he carried. He'd never wanted for anything material, never faced real hardship, never had to prove himself through struggle. The weight of inherited privilege sat on his shoulders like a coat that had never quite fit properly. His father looked up from his papers, adjusting the wire-rimmed spectacles that made him look more like a scholar than the ruthless businessman he actually was. "You're pacing again, David. It's a storm, nothing more. It'll pass by morning." David pressed his palm against the cold glass, feeling the vibration of wind against the window. 3 people have died already, Father. The Kellys lost their roof, and half the miners' families don't have enough coal to heat their homes through this. Henry's expression didn't change. Business had taught him to separate emotion from practical matters, and weather was simply another variable to be managed. The company store extended credit for emergency supplies. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Anyone who truly needs help can apply through proper channels. The casual dismissal sparked something hot in David's chest. He'd heard his father speak this way countless times, reducing human suffering to entries and ledgers, but tonight it grated against something raw inside him. Proper channels take time. People are freezing now. And what exactly do you propose we do about it? Ride out into a blizzard and play hero? Don't be dramatic, son. This is Colorado in February. People know the risks of living here. David turned away from the window, feeling that familiar tension that arose whenever he and his father discussed anything beyond business matters. Henry Sterling was a good man in his way, generous with charities and fair in his business dealings. But his goodness was organized, systematic, filtered through committees and proper procedures. David had begun to wonder if there might be other ways to help people, more direct ways that didn't require forms and approvals and waiting periods. The mansion groaned under the assault of wind, its solid walls and thick windows protecting them from the storm's fury. David knew that 20 miles away, families huddled in cabins and makeshift shelters, praying the wind wouldn't tear their roofs away. The contrast between his warm comfort and their desperation felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. Mrs. Catherine Wells appeared in the doorway, her gray hair pulled back in its usual severe bun, her expression carrying the efficiency that had made her invaluable to the Sterling household for 15 years. "Excuse me, Mr. Sterling, but Cookie's asking about dinner. Should she hold it back given the weather?" Henry waved a dismissive hand. "No need. The staff quarters are well stocked, and the storm won't affect our evening routine." David watched the exchange with growing restlessness. Routine, schedule, order. These things had governed his entire life, creating a predictable pattern that felt increasingly like a prison. He thought about the miners who worked his father's claims, men who faced real danger every day, whose lives held genuine purpose and meaning even if they lacked financial security. After Mrs. Wells departed, Henry returned to his ledgers, but David remained standing by the window. The storm seemed to be intensifying, the wind driving snow horizontally across the valley in sheets so thick they obscured the lights of Millfield Township below. Somewhere out there, people were struggling, suffering, possibly dying, and here he sat in comfort discussing dinner schedules. "I'm going out," David announced suddenly, surprising himself with the decision even as he spoke it. Henry looked up sharply. "Don't be foolish. Nothing good comes from venturing out in weather like this. Someone might need help. The storm's been going for 3 days, and you said yourself that people have already died. What if there are families stranded somewhere, families that won't make it through another night? David, you're talking about riding into a blizzard based on nothing but speculation. If there were people in genuine distress, we'd have heard about it through official channels." That phrase again, official channels. As if human suffering always announced itself through proper bureaucratic procedures. David moved toward the door, his mind made up in a way that felt both impulsive and inevitable. "Not everyone knows about official channels, Father. Not everyone has access to them." Henry rose from his desk, genuine concern replacing his earlier dismissiveness. "Son, I understand your impulse to help, but this is dangerous. You could get lost, injured, or worse. How does that help anyone?" David paused at the doorway, one hand on the frame. His father was right about the danger, but something deeper than logic was driving him forward. Maybe it was years of feeling useless, of living a life where every comfort was handed to him without effort or meaning. Maybe it was the growing sense that his wealth and privilege obligated him to take risks that others couldn't afford to take. "If I don't come back by dawn, send a search party." He left the study before his father could respond, making his way through the mansion's corridors toward the back entrance where the stables were located. The house felt enormous around him, its high ceilings and spacious rooms echoing with emptiness despite the presence of servants and staff. He'd grown up in these halls, but tonight they felt like the walls of a beautiful prison. Mrs. Wells intercepted him near the kitchen, her sharp eyes taking in his heavy coat and determined expression. "Master David, surely you're not planning to go out in this weather?" "Just checking on the horses, Mrs. Wells, making sure they're secure for the night." She studied his face with the penetrating gaze of someone who'd helped raise him from childhood. Catherine Wells had worked for the Sterling family since David was 11, and she possessed an uncanny ability to see through his casual deceptions. The stable hands have already secured everything properly. There's no need for you to venture out. David managed what he hoped was a reassuring smile. I won't be long. Just want to see for myself that everything's properly battened down. Mrs. Wells clearly didn't believe him, but she'd learned over the years when to press and when to step back. Be careful, young master. This storm has teeth. The back door opened into a world transformed by wind and snow. The stable was only 50 yards away, but the distance felt vast in the face of the storm's fury. David bent his head against the driving snow and pushed forward, his boots sinking deep into drifts that had accumulated around the mansion's foundations. Inside the stable, the horses shifted nervously in their stalls, sensitive to the storms. Energy even within the protection of thick wooden walls. David's mount, a sturdy bay gelding named Thunder, nickered softly as he approached. The horse had been a gift for his 21st birthday, bred for endurance and reliability rather than speed or beauty. Easy boy, David murmured, running, his hand along Thunder's neck. I know it's a rough night, but I need you to trust me. Saddling a horse in the storm's chaos proved more challenging than expected. The wind found every gap in the stable walls, sending loose hay swirling and making Thunder skittish despite his usually calm temperament. David worked with practiced efficiency, checking every strap and buckle twice. If they were going out into this maelstrom, equipment failure wasn't an option. He'd brought supplies without consciously planning to do so. A medical kit from the house, extra blankets, a flask of whiskey, dried food that would keep in the cold. Looking at the assembled items, David realized he'd been preparing for this moment without admitting it to himself. The storm hadn't created his restlessness. It had simply provided an excuse to act on feelings that had been building for months. Leading Thunder from the stable required all his strength. The wind hit them like a physical force, threatening to knock both horse and rider sideways. Snow swirled so thickly that David could barely see the mansion's lights behind them, and they hadn't traveled 20 feet from the building. For a moment, he considered turning back. His father was right about the danger. This was the kind of storm that claimed lives, that turned familiar landscapes into deadly mazes. But something drove him forward. Call it intuition, restlessness, or simple stubborn pride. But David Sterling mounted his horse and rode out into the blizzard that February night, following an impulse he couldn't name toward a destiny he couldn't imagine. The first hour was the hardest. Thunder struggled through snow that reached his chest in places, and David had to trust the horse's instincts more than his own vision. The familiar landmarks of Pine Ridge Valley had vanished beneath the storm's white blanket, transforming a landscape he'd known since childhood into an alien wilderness. They followed the old mining road at first, or what David hoped was the mining road. The path was completely obscured, but Thunder seemed to sense the firmer ground beneath the snow, picking his way carefully through drifts that could hide fallen logs or sudden drops. David pulled his scarf higher over his face, but the wind still found ways to cut through his clothes with fingers of ice. Twice they had to take shelter, once behind a stand of pine trees, and once in the lee of a boulder formation that broke the wind's direct assault. During these brief respites, David questioned his sanity while warming his hands against Thunder's neck. What had he expected to find? What could one man with one horse accomplish in conditions like these? But each time they resumed their journey, driven by something deeper than rational thought. David had spent his entire life in safety and comfort, watching other people struggle with problems he could solve by writing checks. Tonight felt different. Tonight he was risking something real, putting his own comfort and safety on the line for reasons he couldn't fully articulate. The storm seemed to be playing with them, sometimes easing enough to let David see 50 yards ahead, other times closing in so completely that he couldn't see Thunder's ears. During one of the clearer moments, he caught sight of something that made his heart skip. Smoke, just a thin wisp rising above the tree line, barely visible against the storm clouds, but unmistakably there. Someone had a fire. Someone was alive out here in this wilderness, struggling to stay warm in conditions that could kill within hours. David urged Thunder toward the smoke, fighting through drifts that seemed determined to swallow them both. The wind carried away any sounds they might have made, but it also masked their approach. The old mining cabin materialized out of the storm like something from a fever dream. David had ridden past this place dozens of times during summer explorations of his father's property, but he'd never seen it occupied. The structure looked ready to collapse, its walls gap-ridden and its roof sagging under the weight of accumulated snow. No smoke rose from any chimney, but the thin wisp he'd seen earlier seemed to be coming from somewhere inside. David dismounted carefully, his legs stiff from the cold and the effort of staying mounted through the storm. Thunder stood with his head down, breathing hard, steam rising from his flanks despite the freezing air. The horse had given everything he had to get them here, and David felt a surge of gratitude for the animal's courage and endurance. As he approached the cabin, David became aware of sounds that cut through the wind's howling. Voices, faint but definitely human. Children's voices, weak and thin, but singing something that might have been a lullaby. The sound stopped him in his tracks, not because it was unexpected, but because it was so heartbreaking. Children, out here in this storm, trying to comfort each other with songs. He moved closer to the cabin, his boots crunching in snow that had drifted against the walls. Through a gap in the boards, he could see the faint glow of what looked like a small fire, barely more than embers. The singing continued, multiple young voices joining together in a melody that spoke of innocence trying to hold back despair. David hesitated at the door, suddenly uncertain. Bursting in unannounced could terrify whoever was inside, especially children who might already be frightened by their circumstances. But the temperature was dropping as night deepened, and anyone sheltering in this broken-down structure was in genuine danger. He knocked gently, a sound barely audible above the storm, then called out in a voice he hoped carried calm authority rather than threat. "Hello? Is anyone in there? I'm here to help." The singing stopped abruptly. David could hear movement. Inside, hushed whispers, the sound of someone shifting position. Then a woman's voice, cautious but not unfriendly, responded through the door. "Who's there? What do you want?" "My name is David Sterling. I was riding through the storm and saw signs of habitation. Are you all right? Do you need assistance?" A longer pause filled with more whispered consultation. David stamped his feet to keep circulation going, aware that Thunder was suffering in the exposed cold behind him. Whatever was happening inside the cabin, a decision needed to be made quickly before the weather got even worse. Finally, the door opened a crack, revealing a slice of pale face and one wary eye. The woman was young, probably not much older than David himself, but her face carried the kind of exhaustion that went deeper than physical tiredness. Behind her, David could make out the shapes of children huddled together in the dim light. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice carrying a mother's instinct to help even when she clearly had nothing to give. "No, ma'am, I'm fine. But you and your children look like you could use some help. How long have you been in this storm?" The door opened wider, and David got his first clear look at Anna Hartwell and her 7 children. What he saw made his chest tighten with emotion he hadn't expected. These weren't just people caught in bad weather. These were people on the edge of survival, clinging to life through sheer determination and the bonds of family love. The woman held an infant against her chest, the baby so still and quiet that David feared the worst. Around her, 6 other children, ranging from teenage to barely walking age, pressed close together for warmth, their faces bearing the hollow look of real hunger. Their clothes were inadequate for the weather, patched and thin, offering little protection against the cold that seeped through every gap in the cabin walls. "We've been here 3 days," Anna said quietly, "since the storm started. We were traveling to Denver when it hit." David looked around the interior of the cabin, taking in the complete absence of adequate shelter, food, or warmth. These people were dying by degrees, and they all knew it. The oldest boy, probably 14, watched David with the wary intelligence of someone forced to grow up too quickly. The younger children simply stared with the listless attention of those too weak to feel much curiosity. "Ma'am," David said carefully, "I have a horse outside and supplies back at my family's home. If you'll trust me, I can get you and your children somewhere warm and safe." Anna's grip tightened on the baby. "We don't have money to pay for help. We don't have anything to pay with." The statement hit David like a physical blow. Here was a woman watching her children slowly freeze and starve, and she was worried about payment. The gulf between his world and hers had never felt so vast or so wrong. "There's no payment required," he said firmly. "No conditions, no expectations. Just a warm place to rest and food for your children." Anna studied his face with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to read people quickly and accurately. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because after a moment she nodded slowly. "All right," she whispered. "We'll trust you." David Sterling had ridden out into the storm that night, driven by restlessness and privilege guilt. But as he looked at Anna Hartwell and her 7 children, he realized he'd found something more important than either. He'd found purpose, real and immediate, and demanding everything he had to give. The storm still raged outside, but inside the broken cabin, something had shifted. Help had arrived, and with it, the first stirring of what the townspeople would later call divine intervention. Getting 8 people and their meager belongings through a mountain blizzard on horseback seemed impossible until David Sterling began breaking the problem into smaller pieces. Thunder was strong, but not strong enough to carry everyone at once. The baby was clearly the most fragile, followed by the youngest children who could barely walk in snow that reached their waists. Anna Hartwell watched David assess the situation with the calculating gaze of someone who'd learned to recognize false promises. She'd seen well-meaning people before, folks who offered help until they realized the full scope of what helping actually required. 7 children weren't easy to move under the best circumstances, and these were far from the best circumstances. "The little ones first," David decided aloud, gesturing toward 4-year-old Rose and 6-year-old Sam. "They can ride double with me, and we'll come back for the others." "No," Anna's voice carried absolute finality. "We stay together. We've made it this far without splitting up, and I won't start now." David looked at her with surprise. Most people in her position would have jumped at any offer of rescue, even a partial one. But Anna Hartwell had spent 2 weeks keeping 7 children alive through determination and fierce maternal protection. She wasn't about to abandon that strategy. Now, Tommy, the 14-year-old, stepped forward with the careful dignity of someone trying to fill a man's role. "Sir, if you could just tell us the direction to your home, we could follow your horse's tracks. It might be slow, but we'd all make it together." David studied the boy's earnest face, seeing intelligence and courage that reminded him of himself. At that age, though Tommy's maturity had been earned through hardship rather than tutoring, the suggestion was practical but dangerous. Following tracks in a blizzard was treacherous even for experienced travelers, and these children were weak from days of hunger and cold. "The storm's getting worse," David said carefully. "Following tracks could mean getting lost, and I won't risk that with your family, but there might be another way." He moved to Thunder's saddlebags, pulling out the rope he'd brought along with other emergency supplies. The idea forming in his mind was unconventional, but it might work if they were careful and if the weather cooperated just enough to let Them move safely. We'll travel as a group, connected by this rope, David explained, beginning to uncoil the sturdy hemp line. I'll lead Thunder, and each of you will hold onto the rope with both hands. That way, if the storm gets worse or if someone stumbles, we won't lose anyone. Anna nodded slowly, seeing the wisdom in the plan even as she worried about its execution. The younger children were so weak that maintaining their grip on a rope through a blizzard might be beyond their strength. But staying in the cabin meant certain death, while moving meant at least a chance of survival. How far is your home? She asked, bouncing baby Jack gently as he stirred restlessly in her arms. The infant's breathing had grown more labored since morning, and Anna knew they were running out of time. About 2 miles if we can stay on the main path. Maybe 3 if we have to take detours around drifts or fallen trees. David tried to make his voice sound confident, though 2 miles in these conditions could easily become 5 or 6 if they lost their way. Lucy, the 12-year-old with her father's stubborn streak, looked between David and her mother with the sharp awareness of a child forced to think like an adult. What if we can't make it? What if someone falls behind? The question hung in the air like a challenge. David could have offered easy reassurances, but something about this family demanded honesty. They'd been through too much to accept comfortable lies. Then we'll rest, get warm, and try again, David said simply. I'm not leaving anyone behind, and I'm not giving up. Are you? One by one, the children shook their heads. Even little Rose, who barely understood the conversation, seemed to sense the gravity of the moment and the importance of their collective determination. Anna wrapped Jack more tightly in his blankets, then looked around the cabin one last time. It had been a poor shelter, but it had kept them alive for 3 days. Leaving it felt like stepping off a cliff into unknown darkness. All right, she said finally. We'll try. Preparing to leave took longer than expected. Anna insisted on fashioning makeshift mittens for the younger children from scraps of fabric, knowing that frostbite could claim fingers in minutes once. They left the cabin's minimal protection. David shared his extra blankets, wrapping them around the smallest children like cloaks. Tommy helped organize the rope system, demonstrating to his siblings how to maintain their grip even when their hands grew numb. The boy had natural leadership abilities that David found himself respecting. In different circumstances, with proper education and opportunities, Tommy Hartwell could accomplish remarkable things. When they finally stepped outside, the storm hit them like a physical assault. The wind had grown stronger during their preparations, driving snow horizontally across the landscape with enough force to knock a person sideways. David had to lean against Thunder's bulk to maintain his balance while the children pressed close together behind him. Remember, David called over the wind's howling, keep both hands on the rope, stay close to the person in front of you, and if you need to stop, call out loud enough for everyone to hear. The first 100 yards nearly broke them. Little Sam stumbled repeatedly in snow that reached his chest, and Rose began crying from cold and fear before they'd traveled 50 feet. David found himself constantly stopping to help someone regain their footing or adjust their grip on the rope. But gradually, they found a rhythm. Tommy took position directly behind David, using his teenage strength to help guide Thunder through the deepest drifts. Anna came next, carrying Jack while maintaining her place on the rope through sheer determination. The other children spaced themselves according to size and ability, with Lucy bringing up the rear to ensure no one fell behind. The journey became a test of collective endurance unlike anything David had ever experienced. In his privileged life, challenges had been largely intellectual or social. Physical hardship was something that happened to other people, problems solved by hiring experts or throwing money at solutions. Now he found himself responsible for 8 lives, navigating by instinct through a landscape that could kill them. All if he made a wrong decision. Thunder proved invaluable, not just for carrying supplies, but for breaking trail through the worst drifts. The horse's bulk created a partial windbreak for the children following behind, and his sure footing helped David navigate safely through areas where the snow might be hiding dangerous obstacles. 20 minutes into the journey, Grace stumbled and fell, her small hands losing their grip on the rope as she tumbled into a snowbank. The line jerked tight as everyone stopped, and for a terrifying moment, David thought they might have lost her. But Tommy was already moving, pulling his 8-year-old sister back to her feet and helping her regain her position. "I'm sorry," Grace sobbed, snow caked in her hair and tears freezing on her cheeks. "I'm sorry, I'll do better." "You're doing fine," David assured her, though his own hands were beginning to lose feeling despite his expensive gloves. "We all are. Just keep holding on." The storm seemed determined to test their resolve. Twice they had to take shelter behind rock formations, while particularly violent gusts passed over them. During these brief respites, David shared sips of whiskey with Anna to help maintain their core body temperature, while the children huddled together like small animals seeking warmth. It was during the second rest stop that David truly began to understand what Anna Hartwell had accomplished over the past 2 weeks. Managing 7 children under normal circumstances required exceptional skill and patience. Keeping them alive and moving through mountain wilderness in winter weather was nothing short of miraculous. "How did you do it?" he asked quietly while the children caught their breath. 2 weeks of travel with all of them. Anna's smile held exhaustion and pride in equal measure. "You do what you have to do. When there's no choice, you find strength you didn't know you had." David nodded, beginning to comprehend the vast difference between theoretical courage and the practical heroism required for daily survival. His own adventure tonight, dangerous as it was, represented a single evening's risk. Anna had been living this level of challenge every day for weeks. Why Denver? He asked, genuinely curious about the destination that had driven them into such dangerous circumstances. "My sister lives there. She's the only family we have left." Anna's voice carried little hope, and David sensed there was more to the story than simple family reunion. Will she be able to help? With the children, I mean. Anna was quiet for so long that David thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of someone who'd been trying not to think about uncomfortable realities. She married well. Her husband owns a dry goods store, and they have their own children to worry about. But it's the only option I could think of. David heard the uncertainty in her voice and recognized it as the doubt of someone who'd been disappointed by family before. Anna Hartwell was traveling toward a destination that might not welcome her, driven by desperation rather than confidence. The third leg of their journey proved the most challenging yet. The main path, such as it was, disappeared entirely beneath drifts that thunder could barely navigate. David found himself making navigation decisions based on barely remembered landmarks that might or might not still be visible in the storm. Then, the 10-year-old began showing signs of serious exhaustion. His grip on the rope became unreliable, and twice Tommy had to grab him to prevent falls. David could see the boy's strength failing, but they were still at least a mile from the Sterling mansion, too far to carry him and maintain their pace. "I can't," Ben whispered during their next rest stop, his young voice barely audible over the wind. "I can't hold on anymore." Anna knelt beside her son, her own exhaustion evident in every movement. "Yes, you can. You're stronger than you know, and we're almost there." But David could see that Ben had reached his limit, and possibly Grace as well. The youngest children were running on empty, sustained only by fear and family loyalty. If they were going to make it to safety, something had to change. "New plan," David announced, making a decision that felt both risky and necessary. "Ben and Grace ride Thunder with me. Everyone else holds the rope and walks beside us. We'll move slower, but we'll move together. Getting 2 exhausted children Mounted on a horse in blizzard conditions proved more difficult than expected. But Thunder stood patient and steady while David lifted first Grace, then Ben, into the saddle. Anna helped position them securely, and Tommy adjusted the rope system to accommodate the new arrangement. The modified group moved more slowly but more sustainably. Thunder carried the two weakest children while the others walked beside him, maintaining contact through the rope system that had become their lifeline. David found himself constantly checking on everyone, calling out encouragement, adjusting positions, and making small course corrections as they navigated through the storm. It was Rose who first spotted the lights. The 4-year-old, walking hand in hand with Lucy, suddenly pointed ahead through the swirling snow and called out in her piping voice, "Look! Pretty lights." David squinted through the storm and felt his heart lift with relief. There, still distant but unmistakably real, were the warm yellow glows of the Sterling Mansion's windows. They'd made it, against odds that had seemed impossible. An hour ago, they'd actually made it. "That's our destination," David told the group, his voice carrying new energy. "Those lights mean warmth, food, dry clothes, and safety for everyone." Anna Hartwell looked at the distant lights and felt something she'd almost forgotten how to feel: hope. Real hope, backed by visible proof that rescue was actually possible. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that her children might not just survive, but actually be safe. The final quarter-mile felt both endless and immediate. The lights grew larger and more defined as they approached, revealing the outline of a house so grand that Anna couldn't quite process its scale. This wasn't just a home. It was a mansion, the kind of place she'd only heard described in stories. David guided them around to the back entrance, where the stables provided some shelter from the wind. Mrs. Catherine Wells must have been watching from the windows, because the door opened before they even reached it, spilling golden light and blessed warmth into the storm. "Master David," Mrs. Wells exclaimed, her usual composure cracking with relief and concern. "Thank God you're safe. Your father's been beside himself with worry." Then her gaze took in the rest of the group, 8 snow-covered figures ranging from infant to teenager, and her expression shifted to the kind of practical concern that had made her invaluable to the Sterling household for 15 years. "Mercy," she breathed. "Come in, all of you. Come in right now before you freeze solid." As they stumbled through the door into warmth that felt like heaven after hours in the storm, David Sterling realized that his impulsive ride into the blizzard had accomplished something he'd never expected. He'd found not just people to rescue, but a purpose that felt more real and meaningful than anything his privileged life had offered before. Behind them, the storm continued to rage, but inside the Sterling Mansion, 8 souls who'd been on the edge of death were taking their first steps towards safety, warmth, and the kind of sanctuary that would change all their lives in ways none of them could yet imagine. The Sterling Mansion's kitchen had never seen anything quite like the scene that unfolded that February night. Mrs. Catherine Wells, a woman who prided herself on maintaining order and propriety, found herself orchestrating what could only be described as organized chaos as 8 half-frozen souls were gradually restored to life. Anna Hartwell stood near the massive cooking stove, baby Jack still pressed against her chest, watching in amazement as the stranger's household mobilized around her family's needs without hesitation or complaint. The kitchen alone was larger than the cabin they'd just escaped, with gleaming copper pots, marble countertops, and a warmth that seemed to emanate from every surface. Mrs. Wells moved with the efficiency of a general commanding troops, dispatching the kitchen staff to prepare hot baths, gather clean clothes, and begin heating soup that would be gentle enough for stomachs that had been empty too long. She assessed each child with a practiced eye, identifying who needed attention most urgently while maintaining the calm authority that kept everyone focused on their tasks. "Mary, draw baths in the guest quarters upstairs," she instructed the young kitchen maid. Use warm water, not hot, and add plenty of towels. Sarah, prepare beef broth with bread, soaked soft enough for the little ones. Thomas, inform Mr. Sterling that his son has returned safely, and that we have guests who require Dr. Moore's immediate attention. David removed his snow-crusted coat, stamping his feet to restore circulation while keeping a careful eye on the family he'd brought to safety. Tommy stood protectively near his younger siblings, his teenage pride warring with exhaustion and overwhelming relief. The boy's clothes were soaked through, but he maintained his role as guardian even here in this place of obvious safety. Lucy held onto Grace and Sam's hands, the three of them staring wide-eyed at surroundings that must have seemed like something from a fairy tale. The warmth alone was miraculous after their ordeal, but the abundance visible everywhere, from the well-stocked pantries to the silver serving pieces, spoke of wealth beyond their comprehension. Little Rose had gravitated toward the great fireplace that dominated one wall of the kitchen, its flames casting dancing shadows that mesmerized her tired mind. Ben sat heavily in a chair that Mrs. Wells had positioned for him, his small body finally relaxing as warmth began to penetrate his frozen limbs. But it was baby Jack who commanded everyone's most urgent attention. Anna had unwrapped him enough for Mrs. Wells to see his pale skin and labored breathing, and the housekeeper's expression had grown grave with professional concern. "The infant needs a physician immediately," Mrs. Wells declared, though she softened her voice when she saw Anna's stricken face. "Dr. Moore is experienced with children, and he'll know exactly what to do. In the meantime, we need to warm him gradually and get some nourishment into him, if possible." Anna nodded mutely, her exhaustion finally catching up with her now that the immediate crisis had passed. For 2 weeks, she'd maintained fierce control over her emotions, staying strong because her children needed her strength. But here in this warm kitchen, surrounded by people who seemed genuinely committed to helping, her carefully maintained composure began to crack. "I don't know how to repay you," she whispered to David, her voice thick with unshed tears. "We don't have anything to offer in return for all this kindness." David looked at her with an expression that mixed compassion with something deeper, something that spoke to the profound impact this night was having on his own understanding of what mattered in life. "There's nothing to repay. This is what people should do for each other. This is what I should have been doing all along." Mrs. Wells, overhearing the exchange, stepped forward with the kind of gentle firmness that had made her invaluable to the Sterling family for so many years. "Right now, Mrs. Hartwell," Anna supplied. "Anna Hartwell, these are my children. Mrs. Hartwell, right now the only thing anyone needs to worry about is getting you and your children warm, fed, and healthy. Everything else can wait. Until tomorrow or next week, or however long it takes." The arrival of Dr. Franklin Moore brought a new level of organized medical attention to the situation. A man in his 50s with gray whiskers and the kind of calm competence that inspired immediate confidence. Dr. Moore had been roused from his own warm home and had ridden through the storm, without complaint upon receiving word that children's lives might be at stake. He examined baby Jack first, his experienced hands gentle as he listened to the infant's breathing and checked his responses. Anna hovered nearby, her maternal anxiety written clearly on her face as she watched the doctor's expression for any sign of his assessment. "Mild hypothermia and dehydration," Dr. Moore pronounced after several minutes of careful examination. "Serious but treatable with proper care. He needs warmth, small amounts of liquid nourishment at regular intervals, and careful monitoring through the night. He's young and resilient, Mrs. Hartwell. With proper attention, he should recover fully." The relief that flooded Anna's face was so profound that David felt his own chest tighten with emotion. This woman had been carrying the weight of her baby's life in her hands for days, never knowing if each breath might be his last. And now a qualified physician was offering hope backed by medical knowledge. Dr. Moore moved methodically through the other children, checking for frostbite, assessing their overall condition, and providing reassurance along with treatment. Tommy bore his examination with stoic dignity, though David could see the boy wince when the doctor checked his fingers for cold damage. Grace and Sam submitted to the doctor's attention with wide-eyed trust, while little Rose fell asleep in Lucy's lap before her turn came. "They're all suffering from exposure and malnutrition," Dr. Moore told David and Mrs. Wells quietly while Anna tended to Jack. "But they're remarkably resilient, and Mrs. Hartwell has done an exceptional job keeping them alive under impossible circumstances. With proper food, warmth, and rest, they should all make full recoveries." Henry Sterling appeared in the kitchen doorway as Dr. Moore was finishing his examinations, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled from worry and the late hour. David's father took in the scene with the quick assessment of a man accustomed to making rapid judgments about complex situations. His gaze moved from the exhausted children to Anna holding her baby, to David standing protectively near the family, and finally to Mrs. Wells orchestrating care with her usual competent efficiency. Whatever Henry Sterling saw in that tableau seemed to satisfy him, because his expression shifted from concern to something approaching approval. "Dr. Moore," Henry said, extending his hand to the physician, "thank you for coming out in such weather. I trust everyone will be well cared for here." "Indeed they will, Mr. Sterling. Your son has quite literally saved these people's lives tonight. Another few hours in that storm, and we might have been having a very different conversation." Henry's eyes found David's across the kitchen, and something passed between father and son that transcended their earlier disagreement about venturing into the blizzard. Pride, respect, and perhaps a new understanding of what constituted worthwhile risk. "Mrs. Wells," Henry continued, "please ensure that our guests have everything they need. Spare no expense in their care, and consider them welcome in this house for as long as necessary." The simple declaration carried the weight of absolute authority in the Sterling household. Mrs. Wells nodded briskly, already mentally organizing sleeping arrangements and meal schedules that would accommodate 8 additional people without disrupting the mansion's operations. Over the next 2 hours, the Sterling household transformed itself around the needs of the Hartwell family. Hot baths were drawn in sequence, starting with the youngest children and working up through the family. Clean, warm clothes appeared, as if by magic, altered quickly by the household seamstresses to fit each child appropriately. Anna found herself in a guest bathroom that was larger than any room she'd lived in as an adult, soaking in hot water that seemed to penetrate bones that had been cold for weeks. Someone, probably Mrs. Wells, had provided soap that smelled of lavender and towels so thick and soft they felt like luxury beyond imagining. When she emerged, clean and dressed in a borrowed nightgown that actually fit properly, Anna hardly recognized herself in the mirror. The frightened, desperate woman who'd been prepared to die in a broken cabin had been replaced by someone who looked almost normal, almost hopeful. Her children underwent similar transformations. Tommy, cleaned up and dressed in clothes that had probably belonged to David during his teenage years, looked like the intelligent, capable young man he truly was, rather than the desperate survivor he'd been forced to become. Lucy appeared almost delicate in a proper dress, her natural grace evident now that she wasn't struggling simply to stay alive. The younger children, bathed and fed and dressed in nightclothes that had been hastily gathered from the Sterling household's extensive resources, looked like different people entirely. Grace and Sam giggled together as they discovered the softness of their assigned beds, while Rose fell asleep almost immediately between clean sheets that smelled of sunshine and safety. Ben, perhaps the most exhausted of all the children after his ordeal during their journey, curled up in a bed that was larger than any he'd ever slept in and was unconscious within minutes of his head touching the pillow. Even in sleep, his face retained some of the tension he'd carried for weeks, but the tight lines around his eyes had begun to ease. Baby Jack, carefully tended by both Anna and Mrs. Wells under Dr. Moore's guidance, began showing signs of improvement almost immediately. His breathing eased, his color improved, and he even managed to take small amounts of warm milk without difficulty. The combination of proper temperature, adequate nutrition, and medical attention was working the kind of miracle that comes from meeting basic human needs that had been denied too long. David found himself moving through his own home with new eyes, seeing the abundance that surrounded him as if for the first time. The Sterling mansion had always been his normal environment, but tonight it felt different. Tonight it felt like a sanctuary that was fulfilling its true purpose rather than simply displaying wealth. He sat with Anna in the small parlor adjacent to the guest quarters where her children were finally sleeping safely. Baby Jack rested peacefully in a cradle that had been quickly retrieved from the mansion's storage, his breathing steady and strong for the first time in days. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find this was all a dream," Anna said softly, her voice carrying wonderment and residual disbelief. "Yesterday morning, I thought we were going to die in that cabin. Tonight, my children are sleeping in beds that are probably worth more than I've ever owned in my entire life." David studied her face, noting the way proper food and warmth had already begun to restore some of the vitality that desperation had drained away. Anna Hartwell was a beautiful woman, he realized, though her beauty had been hidden beneath layers of exhaustion and fear. More than that, she possessed a strength and intelligence that had enabled her to accomplish the impossible. "Tell me about your husband," David said gently, curious about the man who had inspired such loyalty and determination from his widow. Anna's expression softened with memory and grief. "Robert was a good man. He worked hard, loved his family, and always believed that things would get better if you just kept trying. He died in a mining accident last spring, and everything fell apart after that." She told David about the mounting debts, the impossible choices, the gradual realization that they were going to lose everything despite her best efforts. She described the night she'd made the decision to leave, gathering her children and setting out for Denver with nothing but hope and determination to sustain them. "I thought if I could just get to my sister, if I could just make it to Denver, somehow everything would work out. But the closer we got, the more I realized that Clara probably wouldn't be able to help us." Her husband never approved of Robert, thought he was beneath their social standing. "They have their own children to worry about, their own responsibilities." David listened with growing understanding of just how desperate Anna's situation had been. She'd been traveling toward an uncertain welcome, driven by the simple fact that she'd run out of other options. The storm that had nearly killed them had also prevented them from discovering that their destination might not have offered the salvation they'd hoped for. "What will you do now?" David asked, though even as he posed the question, he realized he didn't want to hear certain answers. The thought of Anna and her children leaving, of returning to uncertainty and struggle, created an unexpected ache in his chest. Anna was quiet for a long moment, her gaze drifting toward the room where her children slept safely for the first time in weeks. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "I've been so focused on just keeping them alive that I haven't had time to think beyond survival. Now that they're safe, I suppose I need to figure out what comes next." David found himself weighing words carefully, aware that what he said next could change everything for both of them. What if you didn't have to figure it out immediately? What if you could stay here while you decided what you really wanted to do? Anna looked at him with surprise and something that might have been hope. "Mr. Sterling, you've already done more for us than we could ever repay. I can't ask you to support my entire family indefinitely." "You're not asking," David pointed out. "I'm offering. And it wouldn't be charity. Anna, you've already shown me that you and your children bring something to this place that we've been missing. Purpose. Real purpose." He thought about his conversation with his father earlier that evening. about official channels and proper procedures, and the distance that wealth could create between people and genuine human need. Tonight had shown him a different way of living, a more direct and meaningful way of using his advantages to make a real difference in the world. "I've spent my entire life being useless," David continued, his voice carrying a honesty that surprised even him. "I've had every advantage, every opportunity, and I've done nothing worthwhile with any of it. Tonight, helping your family, risking something real for something that mattered. That's the first time I felt like my life had actual meaning." Anna studied his face with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to distinguish between genuine offers and empty promises. Whatever she saw there must have convinced her of his sincerity, because her expression began to shift from wariness toward something that looked like possibility. "What exactly are you suggesting?" she asked carefully. David took a deep breath, aware that he was about to propose something that would change his life as fundamentally as it would change hers. "Stay, all of you. This house is enormous, and most of it sits empty. Your children could have proper educations, opportunities to become whatever they're capable of becoming. You could have time to heal, to decide what you really want for your future without the pressure of immediate survival." Anna's eyes filled with tears that she tried to blink away. "David, you barely know us. How can you make such an offer to strangers?" "Because you're not strangers anymore," David replied simply. "Because tonight showed me what kind of people you are. What kind of mother you are, what kind of family you've raised. Because I think we need each other more than either of us realized." The conversation that followed stretched deep into the night, filled with practical questions and emotional revelations that gradually built the foundation for something neither of them had expected to find: trust growing between two people who had saved each other in ways that went far beyond the physical rescue from the storm. By dawn, when the blizzard finally exhausted itself and the first pale light began filtering through the mansion's windows, Anna Hartwell and David Sterling had reached an understanding that would transform not just their own lives, but the lives of 7 children who had learned that sometimes salvation comes not through official channels or proper procedures, but through the simple decision of good people to help each other when help is needed most. Spring arrived in Pine Ridge Valley with the gradual persistence of hope returning to places that had known too much darkness. 3 months after the blizzard that nearly claimed 8 lives, the Sterling mansion had undergone a transformation that went far deeper than the simple addition of new residents. The echoing halls that had once felt empty despite their grandeur now rang with the voices of children at play, the sound of genuine laughter, and the warmth that comes from a house that has become a true home. Anna Hartwell stood at the kitchen window, baby Jack balanced on her hip, watching her older children in the garden that had become their favorite playground. Tommy and Lucy were teaching Grace and Sam to plant vegetables, their hands dark with rich soil that promised growth and abundance. Ben chased Rose between the flower beds, both of them shrieking with delight as they played a game that involved more running than rules. The sight still seemed miraculous to Anna, though 3 months of safety and plenty had taught her to accept miracles as part of her new reality. Her children, who had once been gray with hunger and hollow-eyed with desperation, had blossomed into the vibrant, curious, joyful souls they were always meant to be. The transformation was so complete that sometimes Anna had to remind herself that the ordeal in the mountains had actually happened. Mrs. Catherine Wells entered the kitchen carrying a basket of fresh linens, her expression carrying the satisfaction of someone whose domain was running exactly as it should. The housekeeper had embraced the challenge of managing a household that had suddenly doubled in size, finding in the task a renewed sense of purpose that had energized her in ways she hadn't expected. "Master Tommy's been asking about the construction progress again," Mrs. Wells reported with a hint of a smile. "That boy has the curiosity of a born engineer. Perhaps we should arrange for him to speak with the foreman about apprenticeship opportunities." Anna nodded, still marveling at how naturally the Sterling household had expanded to accommodate not just her children's physical needs, but their intellectual and emotional development as well. Tommy had indeed shown remarkable aptitude for understanding how things were built and how they worked. Under David's guidance, he'd begun studying mathematics and drafting, displaying the kind of natural talent that proper education could transform into genuine expertise. Lucy had discovered a love of literature in the Sterling mansion's extensive library, spending hours each day reading everything from poetry to philosophy with an appetite that amazed the tutor David hired. Grace showed artistic inclinations, filling sketch pads with drawings that captured the world around her with surprising sophistication for an 8-year-old. Even little Sam and Rose had begun showing distinct personalities and interests as proper nutrition and security allowed their natural curiosities to flourish. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation belonged to David Sterling himself. The restless, privilege-guilty young man who had ridden into the storm 3 months ago had evolved into someone with clear purpose and unshakable conviction about what mattered in life. His days, once filled with the aimless activities of inherited wealth, now held meaning that energized him in ways Anna found both attractive and inspiring. The new schoolhouse foundation should be complete by next week, David announced as he entered the kitchen, his clothes dusty from a morning spent supervising construction. We'll be able to start classes by fall, assuming we can convince enough families to send their children. The schoolhouse represented David's most ambitious project yet, a building designed to serve not just the Hartwell children, but all the children of Millfield Township whose families couldn't afford private tutoring. It was being constructed on Sterling land but would operate as a community resource, staffed by qualified teachers and equipped with the kind of educational materials that David's wealth could provide, but that would benefit everyone. Anna watched David's animated discussion of curriculum plans and teaching methodologies with the kind of affection that had grown gradually but steadily over the past months, somewhere between the desperate night of their rescue and this sunny spring morning. Her feelings for David Sterling had evolved from gratitude to something deeper and more complicated. He'd proven himself to be more than just a wealthy man with good intentions. David possessed genuine intelligence, remarkable dedication to seeing projects through to completion, and a natural ability to inspire others to work toward common goals. More than that, he'd shown himself to be a man who kept his promises, who honored his commitments, and who had embraced her children as if they were his own family. "There's something else we need to discuss," David said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "I received a letter from Denver yesterday, from your sister Clara." Anna felt her stomach tighten involuntarily. She'd written to Clara weeks ago, explaining what had happened and where they were now living, but she'd received no response until now. Part of her had been relieved by the silence, unwilling to face the complicated emotions that contact with her sister would inevitably bring. "What did she say?" Anna asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. David pulled the letter from his pocket, his expression carefully neutral. "She's concerned about your situation. She wants to know if you and the children are being properly cared for. And she's offering to arrange transportation to Denver if you'd like to continue with your original plan." The offer hung in the air like a challenge to everything Anna had come to believe about her new life. 3 months ago, reaching Clara in Denver had represented her only hope for survival. Now it felt like an obligation from a previous life, a path that no longer held any appeal, but that conscience demanded she consider seriously. "She also mentions that her husband has contacts in the territorial government," David continued. "People who might be able to help you establish some kind of official guardianship arrangement for the children, possibly even financial assistance from territorial funds designated for widow relief." Anna understood the subtext of Clara's offer. Official help, legitimate support, assistance that didn't depend on the continued goodwill of a wealthy stranger who might change his mind at any time. It was the kind of practical solution that a Sensible woman would at least investigate, even if she'd found something better. "What do you think I should do?" Anna asked, though even as she posed the question, she realized she already knew her own answer. David set the letter on the kitchen table, his movements careful and deliberate. "I think you should do whatever feels right for you and your children. But before you decide, there's something I need to tell you." He looked directly into Anna's eyes with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Over the past months, there had been moments between them, glances that lasted longer than necessary, conversations that carried undercurrents of attraction neither of them had directly acknowledged. But David had maintained respectful distance, perhaps aware that Anna needed time to heal from her losses and adjust to her new circumstances before facing additional emotional complications. "I'm in love with you," David said simply, his voice carrying the kind of quiet certainty that transformed ordinary moments into pivotal ones. "I'm in love with you, and I'm in love with your children, and I want us to be a real family, not just people sharing the same house out of convenience or charity." Anna felt her breath catch as emotions she'd been trying not to examine rushed to the surface. She'd known, on some level, that her feelings for David had moved beyond gratitude and friendship. But hearing him voice similar feelings, hearing him speak of love and family and permanence, made everything suddenly real in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. "David," she began, then stopped, unsure how to articulate the complexity of what she was feeling. "I know it's complicated," David continued. "I know you've been through more loss than anyone should have to bear, and I know that trusting someone new with your heart feels dangerous. But I also know that what we've built here over the past 3 months is real. It's not charity or convenience or gratitude. It's love, Anna. It's the kind of love that makes people better than they thought they could be." Anna thought about Robert, about the love they'd shared and the grief she'd carried since his death. For months, that grief had felt like the only connection she had left to the man who'd given her 7 beautiful children and 12 years of genuine happiness. But sitting in this sunny kitchen, looking at David's earnest face, Anna realized that holding on to grief didn't honor Robert's memory as much as embracing the possibility of new love and new happiness. "The children adore you," Anna said softly. "They've started calling this place home, and they talk about you like you're their father. Tommy asked me last week if you might consider adopting them officially, making them Sterlings as well as Hartwells." David's expression brightened with hope and something that looked like wonder. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that was a conversation we'd need to have together, as a family." Anna reached across the table to take David's hand, feeling the calluses he'd developed from months of physical work on community projects. "I told him that love isn't just about feelings. It's about choices we make every day to care for each other and build something meaningful together." David lifted Anna's hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles that felt like a promise and a question simultaneously. "Anna Hartwell, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that some miracles are meant to last forever?" Anna looked around the kitchen that had become the heart of their unconventional family, listened to her children's laughter drifting through the windows, thought about the future that stretched ahead of them filled with possibilities she'd never dared to imagine during those desperate weeks in the mountains. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, with the confidence of someone who'd learned to recognize real love when it appeared in her life. "Yes, David Sterling, I'll marry you." The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the garden, where Anna's children had learned to plant things and watch them grow. Pastor William Grant, who had become something of a local celebrity for his role in spreading the story of the blizzard rescue throughout Pine Ridge Valley, performed the ceremony with the kind of joy that comes from witnessing genuine happiness. The entire population of Millfield Township attended, along with business associates of Henry Sterling who'd traveled from Denver and Colorado Springs to witness what the newspapers had begun calling the romance born of divine intervention. But for Anna and David, The most important guests were the 7 children who stood beside them as they exchanged vows, officially becoming the family they'd been in practice for months. Tommy served as David's best man, his teenage pride evident, as he helped coordinate details with the natural leadership abilities that everyone now recognized would take him far in life. Lucy scattered flower petals with grace and rose, their dresses specially made for the occasion by seamstresses who'd been delighted to contribute to the community's most celebrated love story. Baby Jack, now a robust 10-month-old with rosy cheeks and bright eyes, was held by Mrs. Wells during the ceremony, though he spent most of the time reaching toward his mother and the man who'd become his father in every way that mattered. Ben and Sam stood at attention like small soldiers, taking their roles as family members with the seriousness that children bring to important occasions. Henry Sterling, who'd initially been skeptical about his son's impulsive rescue mission, gave Anna away with genuine warmth and the admission that David's newfound purpose had made him prouder than any business success ever could. The older Sterling had watched his son transform from a restless young man into someone with clear convictions and meaningful goals, and he'd come to appreciate Anna's role in that transformation. Dr. Franklin Moore attended with his wife, both of them marveling at the health and vitality of children who'd been near death when he'd first examined them. Mrs. Wells coordinated the reception with her usual efficiency, though her pleasure in the day's events was evident in the rare smiles that softened her normally serious expression. As the celebration continued into the evening, with music and dancing and the kind of community joy that comes from witnessing something universally recognized as right and good, Anna found herself thinking about the strange journey that had brought them all to this moment. She thought about the desperate woman who'd led 7 children into mountain wilderness with nothing but hope and determination to sustain them. She remembered the terror of that final night in the broken cabin, when she'd been preparing to say goodbye to everything she loved most in the world. The contrast between that moment of despair and this evening of celebration felt like evidence of something larger than simple good fortune. Pastor Grant approached Anna during a quiet moment between dances, his expression thoughtful as he watched the children playing games organized by Tommy and Lucy. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, using Anna's new name with obvious pleasure, "people in town still talk about that night as divine intervention. They say God sent Mr. David into that storm to save your family, and I believe they're right. But I think the intervention went both ways." Anna looked across the garden to where David was deep in conversation with several townsmen about plans for expanding the schoolhouse into a full academy that could serve the entire valley. His face carried the animation of someone discussing work that genuinely excited him, projects that would make real differences in real people's lives. "I think you saved him just as much as he saved you," Pastor Grant continued. "Gave him purpose, meaning a reason to use his advantages for something beyond his own comfort. That's the kind of miracle that changes not just individuals, but entire communities." Anna nodded, understanding what the pastor meant. The blizzard rescue had become local legend, but its real significance lay not in the dramatic rescue itself, but in the long-term transformation it had sparked. David's community projects, funded by sterling wealth but guided by genuine understanding of local needs, were creating opportunities for education and development that hadn't existed before. The schoolhouse was just the beginning. There were plans for a medical clinic staffed by physicians who could serve families who couldn't afford private care, a community center where people could gather for meetings, celebrations, and mutual support, economic development projects that would create jobs and bring prosperity to a region that had always struggled with the boom and bust cycles of mining. But beyond the public projects, there was the private miracle of 7 children who'd been given chances they never would have had otherwise. Tommy was already showing exceptional promise in engineering and mathematics. Lucy's writing had begun attracting attention from educators who believed she could become a significant voice in literature. The younger children were displaying talents and interests that proper education and encouragement were nurturing into genuine abilities. As the evening wound down and guests began making their way home, Anna gathered her children around her for a family photograph that would commemorate not just the wedding day, but the completion of their transformation from desperate refugees to beloved members of a community that had embraced them completely. Standing there with David's arm around her waist and her children arranged around them in descending order of height, Anna felt the weight of gratitude for a journey that had begun in despair and ended in joy beyond anything she dared to hope. 4. The woman who'd walked into a blizzard with nothing but love and determination had emerged with everything she'd ever wanted and some things she'd never thought to want. David looked down at her with the expression of someone who'd discovered that the best things in life come not from careful planning but from the willingness to risk everything for something that matters more than safety or comfort or conventional wisdom. No regrets? He asked quietly, his voice carrying just enough uncertainty to remind Anna that even happy endings require daily choices to maintain their happiness. Anna looked at her children, at the man who'd chosen to love them all unconditionally, at the community that had welcomed them as family, at the future that stretched ahead filled with possibilities they'd create together through love and work, and the determination to build something worthy of the miracle that had brought them together. No regrets, she confirmed, then smiled with the confidence of someone who'd learned that sometimes the best path forward leads through the worst storms, and that divine intervention sometimes looks exactly like one person choosing to help another when help is needed most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.